There is a reason why the cobra was chosen. Why not a lion? Why not a bear? Why not something larger, louder, more fearsome? Because the cobra doesn't need to roar, it only needs to wait. It doesn't chase you down. It waits for you to come too close. It doesn't strike out of chaos. It strikes out of stillness, and that's what makes it dangerous. The cobra is not just a symbol of war or of an enemy beyond the border. It is far closer. It is internal. It is coiled not in some battlefield, but within the heart. It lurks in the shadows of your mind, in resentment you've never dealt with, in grief you never allowed yourself to mourn, in the bitterness you buried so deep you started calling it personality. It's in the fear that dresses itself up as logic, in the voice that tells you you're not enough, that says God has left you, that says your mistakes define you. We drop the warning not because we don't see the signs, but because we don't want to see them. We don't drop Nirmap by accident. We drop it because truth requires responsibility, because if I acknowledge that the cobra is alive in me, I have to confront it. I have to choose between the poison and the promise, but we've made peace with the poison. We've become fluent in negative feelings. We rehearse them, we feed them, we let them set the rhythm of our lives, and then we wonder why nothing changes. You can't build a new life with old venom still coursing through your spirit. You can't walk into your destiny when you're dragging your chains like they're part of your wardrobe. The cobra is subtle. It doesn't need to strike every day. Sometimes all it needs is one bite, one moment of hopelessness, one betrayal you never healed from, one failure you turned into identity. And from that bite the venom spreads. It clouds your thinking. It tells you your past is your prison. It whispers that forgiveness is weakness. It tells you the best way to protect your heart is to shut it down. You start calling it wisdom, but it's fear. You call it discernment, but it's suspicion. You call it strength, but it's just numbness. And while the cobra coils tighter, we drop the warning. We silence the alarms. We start adapting to the dysfunction, making friends with anxiety, giving depression a seat at the table, letting anger drive the car and calling it passion. But the venom is still there, still working, still twisting who you are into something unrecognizable. Do you see? It's not just about overcoming negative feelings. It's about recognizing where they come from and who they're serving. Negative feelings are not just visitors, they are tools of sabotage when left unchallenged. They are not harmless. They are not your truth. They are the enemy's whispers echoing in your own voice. But there is a way to overcome. Not by ignoring it, not by pretending it's all fine. You don't overcome darkness by closing your eyes. You overcome it by lighting the fire. You face the cobra not with more emotion, but with revelation, with identity, with divine fire. You speak to the fear and remind it of your calling. You speak to the bitterness and say, "You no longer own me." You speak to the wound and declare, "I am healing, whether you like it or not." You don't negotiate with the snake. You don't pet it. You don't explain your pain to it. You don't ask it to leave nicely. You rise up and crush it. You put truth where the lies were. You put praise where the mourning was. You put purpose where the confusion was. And you don't wait for your feelings to catch up. You act in faith until they do. Because here's the truth. The cobra doesn't win unless you let it. The warning was given. The map was drawn. The coordinates were clear. The question is, did you drop it? The venom never had more power than the fire. Nirmap was never just a map. It was never just intelligence or strategy or data. It was divine alignment. It was the system of coordinates heaven gave to walk in the dark and still not be lost. It was the voice in the wilderness. It was the lamp in the storm. And when you drop Nirmap, you don't just drop direction. You drop protection. You drop identity. You drop your sense of place in a world that's rapidly unraveling. And that's exactly what's happened. We didn't just stumble into confusion. We didn't just accidentally wake up in a fog. Somewhere along the way, we let go of what grounded us. The moment we dropped Nirmap, we started listening to the wrong signals. We tuned in to fear instead of faith. We turned up the volume of culture and muted the whisper of truth. We swapped the eternal for the immediate, and then we wonder why we're lost, why we feel exposed, why nothing seems to make sense anymore. You see, you can't walk into a war zone without a map. You can't fight serpents with your eyes closed. You can't navigate a collapsing world using a compass made by the same world that's falling. But that's what we've done. We've traded Nirmap for narratives, for algorithms, for emotions, for pride. And what happens when you do that? You fall, but here's the part most don't want to admit. We didn't just drop the map, we dropped ourselves. We dropped who we were meant to be, dropped the mantle, dropped the assignment, we dropped the fire. And once you let go of who you were born to be, the enemy doesn't even need to chase you. You start walking in circles. You start settling for lesser battles. You begin confusing movement with progress. You build altars to distraction, all while your real purpose sits abandoned in the wilderness. The enemy isn't after your feelings, he's after your coordinates, because if he can confuse your position, he can corrupt your mission. And that's the whole strategy, get you to drop the thing that connects you to truth. Once that's gone, everything else becomes vulnerable. But it wasn't stolen. It wasn't ripped from your hands in a storm. It was dropped quietly, subtly, piece by piece, through compromise, through fatigue, through comfort, through offense, through comparison, through delay. We dropped Nirmap when we chose to believe the serpent instead of the voice that called us in the garden. We dropped it when we let the pain speak louder than the promise. We dropped it when we prioritized what we could see over what we were shown in the Spirit. And now, because of it, we walk like soldiers without formation, prophets with no message, builders with no blueprints. And yet the war is still on. The Cobra has not retreated. The system is still failing. The storm still rages. So now we ask, can we find the map again? Can we retrieve what we dropped? The answer isn't just yes, it's we must. Because the moment you realize that you dropped something, that's the moment you can pick it up again. The moment you confess that you let go of your calling is the moment you can reclaim it. The moment you admit that you've been navigating by broken coordinates is the moment the true signal can break through. But understand this, the path to picking it back up isn't always comfortable. It means repentance, realignment, humility. It means silencing every other voice until the only one left is the one that never stopped calling you. It means choosing presence over performance, depth over image, purpose over popularity, truth over trend. You dropped Nirmap, yes, but heaven didn't drop you. He still knows where you are, even if you don't. He still remembers what he put in you even if you've forgotten, and he's still speaking, even if you've been listening to everything else. So, no more wandering, no more guessing, no more adapting to the confusion. This is the moment you reach back, recalibrate, and return to the coordinates. Because this war isn't waiting for you to feel ready. The mission doesn't pause because you paused. You were made for such a time as this. The terrain is hostile, but the path is clear. Pick up the map. Find your position, lock in your coordinates, and don't drop it again, because the serpent doesn't fear your feelings, it fears your alignment. The system didn't fail because the system was broken. The system failed because the soul was disconnected. People look around and ask, what's happening to the world? But they don't look within. They ask, why are the systems collapsing? Political, moral, financial, relational. But they don't stop to ask the deeper question, what's happening to the soul of man? Because the collapse didn't begin in the economy. It didn't begin in the streets. It began in the heart. We think the system is external, but it's not. The true system, the one that holds everything in order, is spiritual. It was established long before there were governments or currencies or institutions. It was set in motion before you were even born, a divine blueprint, a structure that holds heaven and earth in place. And when the soul disconnects from the one who designed it, every other system begins to break, slowly, quietly, then suddenly. A system fails when it forgets its source. When a soul forgets who formed it, confusion becomes normal. And when confusion becomes normal, compromise becomes acceptable. You start to rewrite what was never yours to edit. You redraw the lines of morality to suit your wounds. You reinvent truth to make your pain more comfortable. And one day, you wake up and nothing is solid anymore. Not your convictions, not your relationships, not your sense of purpose. Because when the soul is disconnected, even the things that used to make sense start falling apart. And yet we blame the system. We blame the job, the government, the other side, the family, the circumstance, the culture. But those are just the outer walls. The cracks started in the foundation. You want to know why marriages fall apart. It's not always infidelity or failure or anger. It's because the soul disconnected before the vows were ever broken. You want to know why young people are drowning in identity crises. It's because their spirits were never tethered to anything eternal. You want to know why even believers are exhausted, burnt out, numbed, drifting, because they're trying to live a divine life while being cut off from divine power. You can't run a kingdom life on a disconnected soul. You can't have heaven's order with earth's operating system. The disconnection doesn't happen all at once. It happens the moment we begin to replace presence with performance. When we substitute intimacy for activity, when we start treating God like a backup plan instead of the source code, that's when the soul starts running on fumes. It still looks alive, still functions, still smiles, still sings. But the flame is dimming, and when the fire dies, the system begins to malfunction. Then the enemy steps in, not always to destroy, but to distract. He doesn't always need to strike a blow. All he needs is for you to drift, to slowly disconnect until you no longer remember what you were plugged into. And once the soul is off the grid, the rest of the system follows. You start leaning on your own understanding, your own strength, your own wisdom. And that's when collapse becomes inevitable. But here's what no one wants to admit. A failing system isn't the end. It's an alarm. It's a signal. It's the mercy of God saying, return to the source. The failure is not meant to condemn you. It's meant to wake you up. To remind you that you were never meant to operate alone, that your soul has a design, that you were made to function in alignment with something higher, something eternal, something holy. You don't fix the failure by patching the system. You fix it by reconnecting the soul. You don't overcome burnout by sleeping more. You overcome it by plugging back into presence. You don't restore a broken family by arguing louder. You do it by surrendering deeper. You don't stop the collapse by shouting into the chaos. You do it by listening for the whisper that says, come back to me. When the soul reconnects, order returns. Peace returns, vision returns, authority returns. You can have a storm on the outside and still walk in perfect alignment on the inside. That's what happens when the system is synced with the source, and this is the moment for reconnection. Not tomorrow, not once it all makes sense, not when the circumstances change, right now, in the middle of the confusion, in the middle of the fight, in the middle of the exhaustion, because the system failed not because it was destined to, but because it was running without power. And it's time to plug back in. The power was never the problem, disconnection was. You don't overcome venom with more venom. You don't fight the serpent by becoming one. You don't win spiritual battles by swinging at shadows or throwing punches at feelings. The cobra's bite doesn't kill because it's loud. It kills because it's silent and precise. And the only thing that neutralizes its poison is fire, not more emotion, not motivational phrases, not temporary distraction. Fire. See, we've been taught to manage feelings, to analyze them, to sit with them, to give them names and categories. And yes, feelings matter. But if you stop at feelings, you stay on the battlefield instead of stepping into victory. You weren't called to cope, you were called to conquer. You weren't born to constantly nurse your wounds. You were born to rise in the middle of them with the fire of the Spirit burning through you. You can't reason with depression. You can't outthink shame. You can't out-talk anxiety. You have to overwhelm it with something stronger. And that something is fire, not literal fire. I'm talking about the fire of identity, the fire of purpose. The fire that comes when the Spirit breathes back into your bones. That fire does what no therapy session, no self-help book, no midnight pep talk can do. It consumes the residue of the past. It burns away the lies that wrapped around your heart. It doesn't just make you feel better. It makes you new. Negative feelings thrive in emptiness. They grow in the absence of truth. Fear needs a vacuum to operate. Bitterness needs a place where hope has died. Anxiety feeds off the silence of purpose. That's why the answer isn't just emotional healing. It's spiritual fire. Because once the fire comes in, the cobra has nowhere to hide. You've been told to let it go, but I'm telling you, ignite something greater. You don't beat the darkness by begging it to leave. You light a flame and watch it flee. The enemy wants to keep you feeling because feeling keeps you circling. But fire brings clarity. Fire brings transformation. Fire brings you back into alignment. And I know what some of you are thinking, but I don't feel the fire. I've tried, I've prayed, I've waited. But let me tell you something, the fire doesn't always show up as emotion. Sometimes it comes in stillness. Sometimes it comes in obedience. Sometimes the greatest fire is found in doing what's right even when it feels like nothing's happening. Faith is not a feeling. Purpose is not a mood. You don't need to feel strong to walk in strength. You don't need to feel joy to choose it. You don't need to feel fire to carry it. You act in faith until your spirit catches up. You move forward even if your emotions scream to stay still. Because movement is fire. Discipline is fire. Praise in the storm is fire. Prayer when you're empty is fire. And fire doesn't negotiate, it consumes. There are things in your life right now that only fire can fix. The venom won't leave just because you cry hard enough. The addiction won't break just because you regret it. The identity crisis won't end just because you read one more article. You need to burn it out. You need to rise with a roar in your spirit that says no more. Not because you feel brave, but because you were made to be. When you stop living by what you feel and start living by what's true, the cobra has no power over you. Because the venom only works when it finds a home. But when your house is full of fire, it can't stay. It has to go. The bitterness, burn it. The shame, burn it. The fear, burn it. The regret, burn it. Not in hatred, not in emotional outburst, but in holy fire. The kind of fire that purifies and restores and sends you back into the war with a sword in your hand and clarity in your eyes. This world teaches you to express your feelings, but heaven teaches you to redeem them, to take what was meant to destroy you and turn it into oil for your lamp, to take your scars and make them your testimony, to take your sorrow and make it sacred. That's the fire. And when the fire comes, it doesn't just burn away what's wrong. It reignites what's right. It reminds you who you are. It reminds you what was spoken over you. It reminds you that the venom never had the final word. The serpent struck, yes, but the fire was always stronger.